Hello everyone and welcome to this video on parliamentary procedure for GCSA. My name is Thomas Franklin and I am the VP of Organization Affairs. But most people in GCSA also know me as just the guy who loves the bylaws and loves parliamentary procedure. So that's why I'm making this video. This video is really important because it's really important that we all understand the rules of order so that we can be productive at our forum each week. Forum is the primary place where parliamentary procedure is used. You'll see a much less formal version of parliamentary procedure used at your committee meetings. So it's really forum that is the place that you will use parliamentary procedure. Our parliamentary procedure is found in our Guide to Procedures. It comes from Robert's Rules of Order, which is the gold standard parliamentary procedure that's most widely used across the United States, and that's what we'll be going over in this video. It is not important that you understand every single detail of the rules of order after watching this video. That would be unrealistic, especially if you aren't familiar with the rules of order. If you are familiar with Robert's rules, maybe you can skim this video and just to see what you do or do not know. But what's important is that perhaps you walk away from this video understanding some of the basics of the flow of things. So that's what we'll be kind of covering. So the purpose of the rules of order is ultimately to promote fairness, to facilitate deliberation, and improve decision making. Some basic principles to keep in mind that you'll see get played out throughout the rules of order: the rights of members to participate and speak and vote. Of course, voting is for the representatives, but everyone can participate and speak. And the majority gets to decide, but the minority gets to be heard. Right? Those are. So forum, what role does everyone in student government play at forum? The student body president, the president of GCSA, serves as the presiding officer or chair at forum. The presiding officer doesn't, in his role as presiding officer, doesn't have any substantive power, but has just the procedural responsibility of facilitating the meeting and ensuring that the rules are being followed. The executive vice president of GCSA, or more commonly referred to as the student body vice president, will serve as presiding officer whenever the president steps away from his role as presiding officer. So whether that's him not being able to be there, him and her not being able to be there, or if they step away from that role so that they can participate in some other way, the vice president will then step in. Otherwise, the executive vice president serves as the parliamentarian, which is a little bit interesting because commonly a parliamentarian is never a member of the organization that uses the rules of procedure. A parliamentarian is someone from the outside that comes in. But in GCSA, the executive vice president at forum serves as the parliamentarian. You've probably heard of the term parliamentarian before. The term gets thrown around a lot and sometimes doesn't get used properly. A parliamentarian serves as an advisor to the presiding officer, to the chair, on parliamentary law. The parliamentarian does not actually have any power. The clerk at forum, the secretary, our executive secretary serves that role at forum and make sure that the minutes are being recorded, and we'll talk more about what minutes are. Make sure that the records are being recorded and that anything that needs presenting, digital media or whatever is presented, just make sure that things are conducted in an orderly way. You as the representatives, who I assume are the people watching this video, you guys are the voting membership, right? We talked in the last slide about the rights of members to participate, speak, and vote. So that's you. You are the voting membership. And those three rights are, of course, always given to you. And then everyone else at forum are the non-voting participants. It's important to understand that. They're non-voting participants, but they are participants. So the general student body public that may show up at forum, they are able to participate in forum. They're just not able to vote or make motions, but they're able to participate in debate. And what's also interesting is technically any member of the cabinet at
at forum actually has the same power as any other student that shows up at forum. It's really only the representatives that have substantive power at forum.
All right, so the outline for the agenda, the order of business, is as follows. The meeting is called to order as soon as it's clear that the time for the meeting has arrived and that there is a quorum. What is a quorum? A quorum in any organization is what is the percentage or number of the voting membership that must be present in order for business to happen. In GCSA student government, a quorum is a simple majority of the representatives currently in office. So a majority of the reps must be there. So that's why we have a quorum call as the first order of business, because a quorum call is when the names of all the representatives are called in order to ensure that there is in fact a majority of representatives at forum. That constitutes a quorum. So that's the first item of business. I can't remember if prayer happens before or after a quorum call, but we also pray at the beginning of each of our forum meetings.
The next important item of business is approval of the last meeting's minutes. Minutes, for those of you who are unfamiliar, minutes are a record of what happens at a meeting. These are really important. I think these get underplayed in terms of their importance. Minutes are the official record of what happens at a meeting. In various different organizations, there'll be, when minutes aren't taken seriously, there can be disputes, even just hours after a meeting or days after, as far as what happened, what was the exact wording of a motion that was just approved, what did actually happen at that meeting. So it is really important that you have a written record of what actually happened at a meeting. So that's what the executive secretary does throughout the forum meeting, is they record minutes of what happened. Minutes are not a word-for-word transcription of every word that is said, but it's a description of all the agenda items that happened, all the business that happened, and sometimes like a key summary of what was said, but not a word-for-word transcription. And then those are sent to you after the meeting. And then at the next meeting, you have to approve the minutes from the previous meeting, or unless you have any objections to what's written on the minutes, you won't approve of them. So that's important. Next up is reports. So that's reports from standing officers and committees. So for our purposes, that's sometimes there'll be reports from cabinet members or reports from committees will be given at that time. Then, so really those first four items of business takes up usually maybe about 20% of forum. Those are really just kind of like the opening items of business, but really the bulk of the business that happens is those last two items on the agenda: unfinished business and new business. Unfinished business, anything that wasn't finished or disposed of in the previous meeting automatically appears at the next meeting under unfinished business. So if there's a motion that was tabled at the previous meeting for the next meeting, it'll automatically appear under unfinished business. Then, of course, there's new business. So you always deal with unfinished business first, and then you deal with new business. New business, that's where business happens. That is where you introduce things, you introduce proposals, and things actually happen. And then at the end of the meeting is when you adjourn. So, how does business actually happen at forum? So it can be boiled down to these three simple things: making motions, participating in debate, and voting. That's basically the gist of how everything happens. And let's kind of dive right into what is a motion. You've probably heard of motions before. What is a motion? A motion is a proposition. So whenever you want to introduce an item of business for consideration, you do so by making a motion. And we're going to talk a little bit later about there are various different types of motions, and we'll get into that later. Whenever you're introducing a new item of business into discussion, you are making what is called a main motion. And this is important. A motion controls the discussion that happens. So you have to have a motion that's on the floor in order for you to be debating something. So a motion, you simply are proposing something for the body to consider.
So, for example, this could be an initiative that you're working on as a representative. So you could introduce this in form by making a motion to approve your initiative. And then that would bring your initiative uh, into consideration before the body for discussion and debate.
So handling a motion, so you can make a motion uh, during new business. That's when you can make what's called a main motion, introducing a new item of business, and you wait for the chair to call on you, and then you say, "I move that," and then you state what it is that you're proposing. A motion has to be seconded by another representative, by them simply saying second or seconded. And what's important to understand what that means, when someone seconds something, they aren't necessarily saying that they are agreeing with what you're proposing, but they're saying that what you're proposing is worthy of being considered. It's worthy of discussion. After a motion is moved and seconded, that's when the chair then states the motion. So they then restate what it is that you are moving so that everyone can clearly understand what is being proposed. After the motion has been announced, that's when you then debate and consider the motion, right? So you make the motion, it's seconded, the presiding officer states the motion, and then you debate and discuss what is being proposed. After a motion is being finished, debated, and discussed, you then vote on the motion. Now, as I said before, there are various different types of motions, which we'll get into. Some motions aren't debatable. Some don't require to be seconded. We'll get into what that is. A main motion, which, as I said earlier, whenever you're introducing a new item of business, you're making what's called a main motion. This is how main motions are handled. You make the motion, it's seconded, it's then stated by the chair, and then you debate and discuss the motion. So, what happens during debate? A debate is moderated by the chair. The movant gets to speak first on the motion. So the chair will first recognize whoever made the motion to debate first. What is debate? Just so everyone understands, debate is just a formal way of saying discussion, right? So debate is not necessarily people actually disagreeing with one another, but it's just a formal way of saying discussion, dialogue. All participants at forum can participate in debate. So only reps can make motions and vote, but everyone can raise their hand and wait to be recognized by the chair and can then speak. When you're speaking, you must obtain the floor before speaking, so you cannot cut off other people. You must keep your remarks pointed towards the chair. So what does that mean? Well, in GCSA, we don't have a practice of excessive formality. So you don't have to say, like you might have seen in other bodies, you don't have to say Mr. Chairman or Mr. President every time you want to speak. But you do have to keep your remarks, pointed into the direction of the chair. Unless you're speaking at the front, at the podium. In that case, you are addressing kind of the assembly, but you're pointing your remarks to the presiding officer. You're not pointing your remarks to any specific person. Debate must be germane to the topic. This is important. So if the motion that's currently being debated is $500 for bingo club, you cannot start discussing, why you disagree with the claw credit policy. It has to be relevant to the motion that's on the floor, or somewhat relevant in some way. The chair has to be fair in terms of recognizing people to speak, right? So if you have your hand up, at some point or another, the chair does have to call on you. The chair is supposed to make sure that everyone can speak once on a motion before any person has spoken twice. And the chair, if possible, if it's obvious, the chair is supposed to alternate between people who are in support of something and against the motion. So that's kind of hard to do, but if it's obvious, the chair is supposed to try to do that. After the motion that's on the floor is finished being debated and considered, the motion is then brought to a vote.
Now that I've gone over what a motion is and how to make a motion and how to consider a motion, now I want to talk about the different types of motions that you can make. So as I kind of alluded to, whenever you're bringing up a completely new item of business, you are making what is called a main motion. You can see main motion there at the beginning of this little chart. The reason why it's at the bottom is because the main motion takes precedence over nothing. You can only make a main motion, you can only introduce a new item of business when there's no other business that's before the assembly. Right? If there's any other main motions or any other of these other kinds of motions before the forum, you cannot make a main motion, you cannot introduce something new. So as I had talked about, you make a main motion when you want to bring something new, and it gets seconded, as you can see here on this chart. It gets seconded, and then the chair states it, and then you begin debating and discussing it. Now, during the course of debate, or what's called considering a motion, you can make other types of motions that are called secondary motions. And most of the motions here on this chart are what are called secondary motions, where a secondary motion is if you're making a motion to either improve upon or change or dispose of the main motion. Right? So you can make these types of secondary motions during the course of debating and considering a main motion. I'm going to go over every one of these secondary motions in excruciating detail. I want to just highlight the most important ones and then maybe briefly mention the other ones. You can see here in this chart, and this chart's also available in the guide to procedures as well. I recommend you maybe print this out and use it as a cheat sheet or something for maybe your first or second form. You can see here in this chart, some of these motions require, some of these motions you can interrupt, most of them you cannot. Some of them require to be seconded, like especially the main motion, right, which we talked about. Most of these require a second, but some of them do not. And then some of them require different voting percentages in order to pass, and some of them are debatable, and some of them are not debatable. So if it's not debatable, what that means is that as soon as you make the motion, it gets ruled on, or it gets voted on without any debate. So the most important, one of the most important secondary motions you can make, of course, you do not have to make secondary motions. If people are okay with the motion that's currently on the floor, you do not have to make a secondary motion. But if you want to improve upon or dispose of it, you can. So a motion to amend is if you want to change a motion or improve it in any sort of way. This includes if you want to change any of the contents of the motion. So if you have a proposal for $500 for a particular organization for a budget, and you want to change that to $2,000, you would make a motion to amend. And then after that motion gets seconded and put before the forum, you begin debating that amendment. And you have to debate and discuss and deal with that amendment and vote on it before you can go back to discussing the full motion. If it gets passed, you go back to discussing the main motion, but now the main motion has been revised, right? If it didn't pass, if the amendment did not pass, you go back to discussing the main motion, but it hasn't been revised. Other important motions, secondary motions you can make, a motion to refer. That's if you want to refer the motion to a committee. So if you think that the motion that's currently before the body needs to be maybe dealt with some more in a committee before spending more time in forum debating it, you can make a motion to refer to a committee, and that's a way of disposing of it. A motion to postpone, that's if you want to postpone the current motion that's being decided for a later time or for a later specific date. Motion to close debate, this is if you want to immediately vote on something. That's if debate is going on and you think, you know what, let's end debate. This is a waste of time. We're ready to vote. you can make a motion to close debate. Move to close debate or move to call to question. They mean the same thing. That requires a 2/3 vote. Limit debate or extend debate, that's if you want to. Ordinarily, debate will go on for as long as people want to debate something. But if you don't want to close debate, but you just want to limit it to a certain amount of time or limit the amount of time someone can speak, ordinarily it's a 10-minute max for any individual person who wants to speak. If you want to limit that by any way, you can make a motion to limit debate. Lay on the table is if you want to take the current motion and lay it on the table. What that does is it disposes of it for now, and then it'll immediately come up again at the next meeting under unfinished business. So those are the important ones to discuss. And a point of inquiry is also pretty important. This is at any point in time, you can interrupt, as you can see it says here on the chart, you can interrupt to make this motion. If you don't understand what's happening, you can make a point of inquiry, and the presiding officer will then tell you, what is happening. This is really important if you're about to vote on something and you don't actually know, it's not quite clear, hey, what's actually being voted on right now. You can make a point of inquiry and ask the chair, what are we about to vote on, or what motion is currently on the floor. All right, that's really important. You can interrupt to do that. It doesn't require a second, and the chair just simply tells you. Point of privilege, that's for if you cannot hear the person who's currently speaking, or and you want them to speak louder, you can say, hey, point of personal privilege, can the person who's speaking speak louder, right? That's something you can interrupt to say or do. A motion to adjourn or recess, they're not really secondary motions. They don't necessarily have anything to do with the current motion that's on the floor. Those are motions you can make at any point in time. You cannot interrupt, however, to do that. You have to, of course, wait your turn to do that. So when it's time to vote on a motion, there is 4 different types of methods for voting. And the chair decides which type of voting procedure should happen based on what type of motion is being considered. Typically for procedural motions or motions where it's clear that there's not going to be any objection to it and we want to just quickly pass it without the need to waste time to do a full, more formal vote, unanimous consent is an efficient way to do that. Unanimous consent is where the chair will simply state the motion and will ask if there are any objections. And if no one says anything, if no one objects to it, the motion just passes. Voice vote is used for most other motions, substantive motions where you're actually proposing something. This is where the chair will ask for the ayes, and you'll simply say aye if you're representative to vote in favor, and then we'll ask for the noes, and you'll vote no if you do not agree. And then if it's clear, the chair will then say, the ayes have it and the motion passes, or the noes have it and the motion fails. A show of hands is another type of voting method where the chair will ask you to raise your hand if you support the motion, or we'll ask you to raise your hand if you do not support the motion. And then lastly, there's roll call vote. This is used for quorum call at the beginning to determine if there's a quorum, or typically a roll call vote is used for motions that require a 2/3 majority or more that are substantive motions that require 2/3 or more. Roll call is where each representative's name is individually called, and then when your name is called, you state aye or no if you agree or disapprove of the motion. Lastly, I want to go over what are called incidental motions. These are quick little points or motions that you can make that require immediate attention. You can make these really at any time, and most of these you can interrupt to do, except for a division of the question. So I want to go over each of these. A point of order is kind of like an objection. If you think that there's something that's happening that is out of order, if you think that the rules aren't being followed, for example, if the chair states a new motion that's been made, and the motion requires a second, so as we talked about, main motions and most other motions require a second, and it doesn't receive a second, and the chair proceeds to state the motion, you could then make a point of order and say, point of order, the motion still needs a second, right? Point of order should always be used in a way that's not aggressive, though. So even though you can and should interrupt to make a point of order should be made in a way that's helpful, and the chair should also receive a point of order in a way that should not be defensive about it. A point of order is supposed to assist the chair in enforcing the rules. The chair gets to make a decision on the point of order, so the chair will rule on the point of order. If you disagree with the ruling that the chair has made, you can then interrupt again and say, I appeal the decision of the chair, and then there's no debate on this. It goes straight to the reps to vote on whether or not your appeal is valid. Some other incidental motions: objection to consideration. This is rare. This is something you can do if you want to object to a motion being considered. So you can do this. So if someone makes a motion, up until the point where that motion begins getting debated, so really you have a very short window to do this between when the motion's made, if it requires a second, and then the chair states the motion. Up until the point where it starts getting debated, you can interrupt and say, I object to the consideration of the motion. It doesn't require a second. It can't be debated. It just goes straight to a vote. If 2/3 of the reps agree with you, then the motion that's been made that you're objecting to is dismissed. This is rarely used. Withdrawing a motion, this can only be done by the movant, the person who made the motion that is getting withdrawn. And they can also interrupt to do this. They simply can interrupt and say, Mr. Chairman, I request that my motion be withdrawn. The chair then asks the representatives by unanimous consent, is there any objection to the motion being withdrawn? If there's no objection, then the motion is withdrawn. A couple of other motions: division of the question. This is if a motion that's currently on the floor, if you think that that motion should be divided into two separate motions. So let's just say the motion is to approve $500 for the so-and-so representative and then $200 for something else. If you think that that motion should be divided into two different motions, you can make a division of the question. You cannot interrupt to do this. You have to wait your turn. Then lastly is a division of the assembly. This is if the chair is doing a voice vote on a motion and you insist that there should be a hand-raising vote. You can make a division. You can interrupt and say, division of the assembly, I request a hand-raising vote. And that will require the chair to then do a hand-raising vote instead of a voice vote.